Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown on this sunny Friday afternoon. We're coming to you a little later in the week because, as I mentioned on our Twitter feed, if you missed it, we recorded an interview with Kieran Maguire from the Price of Football podcast. That's going to be released over the next couple of weeks when the football season actually calms down. So basically, what we did was we spoke to Kieran about where Celtic are at financially, where Rangers are at financially, where Scottish football is in the world of football, and sort of is it positive or negative for Celtic going forward? And is it positive or negative for Rangers going forward? Where are they at? Is the sort of messaging that we're hearing from the other side of Glasgow with the shares and the board members leaving, does any of that actually matter? That's all covered with Kieran. And we're going to be releasing that podcast over the next couple of weeks, probably after the Scottish Cup final, I would imagine. But we decided to hop on and record another podcast for the week because there was a midweek game this week against Hibernian, and it ended 4-2 to Hibernian. So that is another game since Celtic has won the trophy that they have not won. And I think fans are fairly angry. Guys, Chico James, you're with me as always, as is Alan Morrison, Celtic by Numbers. Alan, I'll throw this to you because you weren't on last week's show. I mean, last week's general vibe between me and James was I can see why people are angry, but I don't really care that much because they've already won 2 trophies this season and are going for a third next week. So where do you stand in all of this?
It's obviously frustrating, losing games to the team winning, and it's a bit jarring when the performances have been so consistent to then see performances not as consistent. But on the other hand, as per your point last week about players not playing together before, is a point well made. Asking players to prove something that they've already proven, they've achieved the goal of winning the league. They're not going to feel they need to do it again. And then the third element of all these teams, in the structure of the split in Scotland, is that one of the really positive aspects of that is it often leaves all the teams with a lot to play for late deep into the season, and we've seen that this season, and especially with the European qualifications expanding thanks to the Europa Conference League, it means there's some European places up for grabs, and the £4 million estimate that clubs will make from being in the Europa League group stage is transformational for every club in the league. So these are big incentives for teams to press on to the end of the season, and Celtic players just simply don't have that. Now, of course, they're professional, and of course they're trying, but it doesn't take much of a dip in intensity, 1 or 2%, if you want to put it in those terms, for it to make a big difference on the field. And I think that's what we're seeing. And should we be worried? Well, history suggests not, because this kind of drop off is absolutely with precedent. I mean, I look back to the basically this century when Martin O'Neill took over, and his team blasted their way through the league in his first season. Apart from the 5-1 game at Ibrox, was their only loss in the season. And then once the title was won, they lost the next 2 games to Dundee and Kilmarnock. They then had a Scottish Cup final to win, which they did perfectly successfully. I could go on and on. There's many seasons where we've seen this. We've seen it in Gordon Strachan's first season as well, where there was a very dominant league campaign, and they would really go on to win only I think 1 or 2 of their last 6 league games, including getting thumped 3-0 at Tynecastle. The 2006-2007 season was very similar. So there are in Lennon's 2012-13 campaign. We lost one, drew one of our last 4 matches post the wrap up, but comfortably won the Scottish Cup against Hibernian, and there are more seasons. That we can use as examples for this, but there's a number of seasons where Celtic have done this. They've then had disappointing results post the title being wrapped up, but they've generally gone on to win the Scottish Cup at the end of it when it's been up for grabs. So I fully expect focus to be realigned, from this weekend, when it will be clear to the players that that they're playing for a starting spot in the cup final team. And then obviously a cup final will take care of itself. So it's disappointing, but I'm not. I can't honestly say I'm massively hung up about it. In all honesty.
Mm. I don't want to compare these two things because they're not the same thing, but just bear with me because it's a good insight into how motivation can work. And that is when I did the marathon. So I was training for about 20 weeks or so, every single day, bar one, for 20 weeks straight. Didn't miss a run, didn't miss a training really over the course of it. Did the marathon. Since I've done that, I
Look at you.
could
You're
not
falling
give
apart.
I could not give a shit about training. I could not give a shit. I don't want to go out and run. I don't, you know what I mean? So it's not that, I haven't, I still do a run. I still go out for my runs are shorter now, and I'm probably not putting as much emphasis on what I eat around them and things like that. But ultimately my goal was to train for the marathon, complete the marathon. I've done that now, and suddenly my motivation for doing that sort of training is gone. So it's not the same as that for Celtic, because they're getting paid to do what they're doing, and they're professional footballers and so on and so forth. But it's similar enough. Like their aim was to win the league cup, and their current aim now is to win the Scottish Cup. So the league is fairly irrelevant at this point. But James, I guess what people are angry about, and if we go to the other side of the story, is probably the manner of these performances. It literally does look like they don't care. And I think that's where you start to lose a little bit of good faith with fans.
I think that it's probably something in between, meaning that I think that some of the narratives they get accumulated over a season start to crumble a bit, and then people look for assigning blame. And I agree with everything that Alan said. We talked about it last week, and I don't get too worked up over this either. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to garner from these games, meaning that you do see, as Alan suggested before we went live, some issues around toxic combinations of players that aren't great at precision passing, so to speak. Positional issues that we've talked about with Bernabe, Kobayashi's issues in the air, not that surprising. So you see some of the stuff that gets manifested in some of these games, and it's not so much that you say, oh, this is the end of the world, but I think it does prick a bit of a bubble in the narrative about the degree with which recruitment has been great. And this is something I've talked about really for the last 2 seasons, is that I've thought that recruitment has been improved from what had been incoherent to coherence, but that the quality of players being signed was probably being overinflated a bit relative to the narrative, and that a lot of the dominance that we were having domestically had to do with the kind of relative matchup in Ange ball, so to speak, and the difficulty that domestic opposition was having to adjust to it. And they've adjusted to it to a degree. We've talked about that all season relative to the St. Mirrenization of opposition. So I think what you're seeing is some of this, not great recruitment manifesting to a degree in some of these games on the margin. And again, it's all of these issues about intensity. And, we talked about it last weekend about, Ange has a reputation of running training very hard, and almost like a Bielsa culture in that way. And you throw that into the mix, that these guys have been working their ass off, not only in games, playing a very challenging physical style of play, but also in training every day. And now you take away the carrot that, hey, they've kind of, the end of marathon aspect. And, on the margins, as Alan said, that 1-2%, all of this makes kind of natural sense. I think that part of the kind of outlandish response in some aspects of the support is because I think there was an expectation or a belief, a narrative that a lot of these players were maybe better than they are. And that when you take that 1 or 2% away and you put a few of them together, all of a sudden you kind of get a really ugly game. And that's, we've had a couple of them now where some individual performances have been pretty stinko.
Yeah, well,
So
I think
I'll just check in that Ange Ball, when Ange Ball's not done well, it can be pretty brutal, right?
Yeah,
because it's
like
not
we've seen
easy.
in Europe.
It's not,
I mean, again,
yeah,
some of the games
it's
in
not
Europe.
easy.
Yep.
It's not easy. It's not easy. The pressing, the triggering, of presses has to be highly coordinated. The passing has to be sharp and slick. The movement has to be good. Now, these are all the things that's just decreased a little bit when you're not having to absolutely kill yourself. And Ange ball done badly can look really ugly.
Well, I think that's manifesting in the defense more than anywhere else because, we're currently playing three sort of squad players are starting in the defense at the minute, and Celtic have conceded 34 goals this season, and 9 of them have come in the last 3 games where we've been playing that defense. So I think that's probably the best indicator of who is the best defenders in the team or who are the best players in a combination in the team, and that is Cameron Carter-Vickers with Starfelt, AJ, and Greg Taylor. It's not the current one. Maybe Kobayashi might fight for Starfelt's place next year, but at the minute, he's not impressing enough to do that. So, I mean, I still will maintain that I will give Kobayashi, Owada, and loads of time to come into this team and actually further develop themselves because, I mean, look at Maeda and the development he made, Hatate as well, and then Kyogo. Well, Kyogo's just been good from the start, but you got to give these players time to bet in. Now, Bernabé, I think, is a different case because he's had his time to bet in and he hasn't. So I think I would be a little less patient with him. If he doesn't push for a place next season, then he's probably not good enough because he didn't do it this season. Can I change course though from the game to the news of the last couple of weeks or the last couple of days, especially, and that is that Ange Postecoglou could be in contention for the Tottenham Hotspur job. So this all came after Arne Slot, who was supposed to take over Tottenham, seemed to be all agreed, and then that fell apart. I think that's like manager number 6 now who have rejected Tottenham at this point. And then the news broke that Ange Postecoglou was the first choice manager now that Daniel Levy wanted to bring to the club. This has developed over the last couple of days. It's now looking a little bit like maybe Brendan Rodgers, also former Celtic, could be the other name in contention for this. But Ange was speaking to Sky Sports today and he was asked about it. So I just want to play this audio for you from Sky Sports, and then we can, like we are pop psychologists, we're going to dissect in depth his body language, his use of words and things like that. So this is Ange speaking on Sky Sports earlier.
Feels like at least once a month we ask you about speculation linking you with English Premier League jobs. There does seem to be a lot of speculation, certainly about Spurs this morning. How much has that come onto your radar?
And yet I'm still here. Yeah, it doesn't. I think anyone who knows me, and I've been asked about these kind of things plenty of times, know that what's important for me is the here and now. I've never planned anything in my football career. My ambitions right now are to enjoy tomorrow, have a good game, and then try and win a cup final and make it a special year. It's not every year you get the opportunity to win a treble. And if anyone thinks I'm thinking anything other than that, they don't know me.
Yeah, I suppose these things ultimately are a compliment, although it might be a distraction at times. Do you get quiet moments in the season where you think about your ambitions and what you've still got left to achieve here?
No, because I know that's not how football works. You can't, as a manager, sort of try and chart a course for yourself to be in a certain position at a certain time. The one thing I do know for a certain 100% is that if you're not concentrating on the task at hand, your destiny gets taken out of your own hands. And I've worked really hard in my career not to be in that position, and the way I've done that is to make sure that beyond what happens this week, and like I said, we've got a couple of big games, I'm not going to think about anything else other than that. And whatever happens in my career from here onward will happen because I'm doing what I do really well.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned that special bond with the fans. What would you say to any Celtic fans who are unsettled or worried that temptation comes along?
Again, I've said before, I think what the Celtic fans want is their manager to be concentrating on what's important for them now. I'd hate to think that our supporters want me thinking about anything else other than having a great game tomorrow, having a great day, and then winning a cup final and making it a treble, which will make it a special year. I think that's where they want my responsibility to lay.
Feels like at least once a month we ask you about speculation link.
So that was Ange Postecoglou speaking on Sky Sports earlier. James, most of the comments under that post when Sky Sports put it up on their Twitter was, he didn't say he's not leaving.
Yeah, again, as you said, this is pop psychologist, but I would say if I was going to rate that between a guy who's definitely not going and a guy who is at least in the process of thinking about it seriously, I'd shade it significantly towards the latter. Unfortunately, I mean, in that, we talked about not that long ago about the pop psychology about his answer about his kids a couple of weeks ago, and so this has me swinging back towards the idea that he's a really ambitious 56-year-old that doesn't have he's got more of his career behind him than he does in the front of him. So, and in the grand, this is not Everton or Leeds. Tottenham would be, and Tottenham's a bit of a mess from a football operations perspective, which again fits with his kind of profile of looking for control theoretically. And, if they were going to offer him that kind of control, they're going to have enough money that if he makes a real difference, they're not a top budget, but they're going to have enough that, he would have enough resources to, given the way he wants to do things, that I think I could see it being appealing to him if he got the kind of assurances that I would think he'd be looking for. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those situations where smoke could be fire, unfortunately. And I saw, I think it was Roger Mitchell tweeted out the bookie odds, and I think Ange had moved to the top. Not that means anything, but maybe it's a Rangers fans conspiracy trying to get us all to have a heart attack this weekend and ruin our cup final coming up. I suspect not. So, yeah.
Given some of the reporting, I think the links are definitely there. Now, to me, Ange sounds like someone who is definitely talking or willing to talk, if not already talking to the club. That doesn't mean he's going to go. That just means, I mean, like I said, Spurs have tried at least 4 other people at the minute. Arne Slot was supposed to take it and he didn't take it. There is a reason they're not doing that. Ange has been very careful in his selection of clubs, and I think that is probably the only thing that's stopping me from thinking he might stay at Celtic and not go to Spurs, because if Spurs were not in as much of a mess as they are and have the basket case of the owner that they have, I think it's too big of a job not for him to take the leap and go into the Premier League, given the resources he'll have, the money he'll get, the fact that it's just down to London. It's not a big, a huge move across the world again. But Alan, let's take this word by word. The first sentence he says is, "And yet I'm still here." So, I mean, that's promising.
There's nothing in there that I wouldn't have expected him to say. He's old enough and ugly enough to know the way of the world, and is equally as he could, some unbelievable job could be offered to him in the next week, and therefore, or if he makes false promises about being here for X number of years, he'll look stupid. By the same token, it being football, we could lose to Inverness in the cup final and he gets sacked. I mean, because this is what football's like. It's just stupid. So he's absolutely right to sort of steer a course through the middle of this. Secondly, if Spurs want to talk to them, why wouldn't he talk to them? I mean, of course you would. And if I was in his situation, I would. You'd have to see what they had to say. Talking to someone is a million miles away from, agreeing a job and agreeing all the parameters of the job. That's a whole set of detail and differences. As far as Tottenham are concerned, it's quite interesting. I get a lot of this. Oh, they're a basket case. I think and to be fair, James was very specific about the football operations aspect of Tottenham being a basket case. I've heard Kieran Maguire on his Price of Football podcast more than once saying that Tottenham Hotspur, from a financial management perspective, only from a financial management perspective, is the best run club in the Premier League. Okay, so that is equally.
But that's part of the
he might,
problem, though. That is part of the problem because
well,
Daniel Levy looks
yeah,
at it purely from a business and does not risk when it comes to football, and that you need to risk if you're coming up against state-run clubs.
and
And
we've lived through that. We lived through that. We lived through the accountancy years with Peter Lowe, so we know how that goes. And if that at Tottenham, if that extends in the same way as it did at Celtic of interference in transfer dealings, then obviously that is a problem. But in terms of running the club and the company, which I believe are the same thing, then they are arguably the best run club in that league. So that's something to consider as well. But obviously, like you say, you have to look at what the football operations relationships would look like. That's going to be his primary well, his primary his primary his primary concern will be, does his family want to do this? Does his family want and him want to take this on? You've got to balance the job that he has in front of him at Celtic, the Champions League opportunities, the ability to shape a massive football club and leave a lasting legacy in Europe, versus potentially becoming another 9 months and you're out casualty of the madness that is the English Premier League. So all these things he has to weigh up, and I don't think it'll come down to, oh, it's the Premier League, it's Tottenham, therefore he's going to go. I don't think it'll be as simple as that. I think there'll be a lot of very complicated thoughts that go through his head just based on what he said in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if he goes, to be honest. But if he does go, then I think he's been told that he will have things running the way that more or less he wants them. Because otherwise, I don't think he would go. Now, whether those promises or assurances turn out to be true or not would be a matter of time. But yeah, it may well happen. It may well happen, and because it's going to happen one day.
Yeah, the other part of this is, I mean, and again, I obviously don't know, but my guess is that given his career trajectory, that the man's not wealthy. Like, he might be okay. I mean, he's probably made a good living, but not, Premier League, secure your family for the next 3 generations
well, he's about to
for
sell his
working
$3
9
million
months.
mansion in Australia. Did you not see that news?
Well, right, but that's
Yeah,
not right. That's doing well, right? So that's what I'm saying. That's not multi-generational type of wealth.
This is James's level of wealth, Enda, not
No,
ours,
no,
mate.
heavens no.
American capitalism coming
Yeah,
into
right,
this.
right.
He's got 3 mil, so what? What's that?
Right, but
Chump
that's
change.
again,
It's not
that's
generational. A couple of mil, that's not generational.
it's not. And so, for him to sign a 4-year deal where he's going to make 20 million or something, which and you probably know better than I do. To me, that's probably like Premier League Tottenham kind of manager money, if not low. You get sacked in 9 months and cash is 20 million. That's and he's the kind of guy who's not going to think that. I mean, he's obviously going to bet on himself and have the confidence. So this goes back to that issue where, I mean, I think Rodgers with bonuses and everything else was up to a couple of million or maybe 3 at Celtic. So, it's just, we can't compete with the kind of money that particularly a club like Tottenham can throw at a manager. And I'm not saying that that's the only thing. And, to Alan's point about lifestyle and family and all of these things are going to go into the calculation, but, significant life-changing money is certainly going to be part of that equation as well.
Conte, I know Conte was Conte. He, his reputation comes ahead of where Ange is at the minute, but he was paid around 40 million by Tottenham for his time, including 4 million severance. So, if he gets sacked by if Ange went to Tottenham, got sacked by Tottenham, he'd probably get more in his sacking payment than Celtic can pay him over the course of a 4-year contract. So that's where we're at in terms of this. Some people
there were reports and I think pictures of Desmond being in and meeting with Ange too. So again, smoke, fire, right? So is there a move to try and get him to stay and maybe put in the kind of stuff that we did after Rodgers' first season, or it was reported at the time? to dangle carrots, all that kind of stuff. Who knows? But there does seem to be some, pieces on the chessboard moving, or at least I think it would be reasonable to speculate that there's some things going on. Doesn't mean he's leaving, but there might be some motion.
Yeah, and some people who are watching on YouTube might not have noticed that Alan has switched from the middle to the right box on our screen. That is because when we were setting up originally, his internet was wonky. So while you were doing that, Alan, while you were switching from the middle box to the right box, I asked this question of James. It's a stupid theoretical question, but I was just trying to think, if Ange leaves, which, it is a possibility, is he the first Celtic manager since Martin O'Neill to leave on good terms with the Celtic fans, or leave with his reputation still as high? Because I feel like there's a lot of revisionism around Gordon Strachan. A lot of people don't tend to like or remember Gordon Strachan's reign very well. But outside of that, Rodgers definitely didn't leave on good terms. Dyla resigned, so that sort of wins you some favor. But Neil Lennon definitely didn't leave on good terms. So I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think Ronnie Dyla left on good terms as far as the fans were concerned, and perhaps there was recognition all round that I've no doubt that the manoeuvrings for Rodgers were part of that decision being arrived at. The fact that he was allowed to resign, rather than being kicked out, for example. All of that suggests that an amicable arrangement was arrived at for everybody, and I think the fans, I believe, look at Ronnie quite with quite favourably, really. I think with Strachan, it was a really difficult situation. Obviously, he'd won 3 in a row. He got into the Champions League out the groups twice. He'd had to completely reinvent the squad on a much reduced budget. He'd done all that, and then of course we had the tragedy of Tommy Burns, the drama of the last day league title win at Dundee United a few days after that, and the emotion. And I think I'm pretty much of the belief that Gordon Strachan would have left at the end of that season regardless, and he because of the whole emotion, the whole Tommy Burns factor, he stayed that season too long. Now, whether that meant that he left on bad terms, I'm not so sure. I think Gordon Strachan will always have a degree of affection, and I think he should do. I think he did a remarkable management job. I know the football was rather prosaic at times, but he did a remarkable job to turn around the club, which, because Martin O'Neill's obviously had a great team, but he was very poor at squad management, and Strachan had to kind of unpick a lot of the weaknesses in an aging, expensive team. So that's just my personal view on Strachan. Others may feel differently, and so granted, obviously with Rodgers, I don't think we'll see Ange walking out the door. Obviously, with a cup final to play, I think if anything happens, it will be stage managed to happen after the cup final, and it will be with everyone's best wishes. Would be my guess if it comes to that. So, and I think everybody should, appreciate that this is just the reality of football. As Kieran will tell us in the podcast, Scotland's place in the world as far as football is concerned is not as high as we'd all like it to be, and as much as Celtic is genuinely by any measure one of the world's biggest, greatest football clubs, financially we cannot compete with the likes of Tottenham Hotspur. And as James rightly says, Ange is an ambitious person. I mean, he said he'd made up his mind that he was going to leave Yokohama, and that for him and his family, the goal was to try and make his name in Europe. And Celtic have given him that opportunity. I don't think he'll walk away from that lightly, by the way. So this is an ambitious person, and so I'm sure he would want, and if it was down to him, and sometimes it isn't, he would want to leave on the best possible terms with the best possible timing. But as I say, football's not like that, and it doesn't always work out that way. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and there are so many factors that go into this decision as well, because like on face value, yes, Tottenham in the Premier League, bigger budget, bigger players, more scope, larger going forward. But Celtic are in the Champions League next season. So in the same way that football is fickle, in that Ange could stay at Celtic one more year, take them into Europe, bomb out of Europe completely, and not get a big break at another club. And he doesn't necessarily need to leave Celtic, but the reality is he's an ambitious person. He wants to test himself in different leagues at different levels. But he could stay one more year, bomb out of Europe, and then suddenly these offers, it's not a Spurs coming and knocking, it's, a Club Brugge or someone that's further down the pecking order. And he's missed the boat. Now, alternatively to that, he could stay at Celtic, play in the Champions League, do really well in the Champions League, and there's another offer at another Spurs type team where they're in better shape. He's got more scope he's got more trust, firstly, from the board, and then he goes in and he does a better job. So, I mean, it's a really tough one. I don't know. It's the first time where I've been like, yeah, I don't know if he can turn that one down, because football is such a weird, and you just have to look at some of the moves, some of the managers have made in the past. It looked like Manchester United missed the boat with Antonio Conte. He went to Spurs, and then Antonio Conte turned out to be terrible, and Eric Ten Hag took the job, and now he's doing a much better job. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen with Ange here. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. What happens next, James, for Celtic? Nothing's going to happen until the Scottish Cup's over. I think that's probably an absolute fact of all this. But what's the first move for Celtic if he does go to Spurs? Because bear in mind, this is a point I meant to make there. Harry Kane is likely to leave Spurs in the summer. So if Ange goes there, I'm just putting it out there, Kyogo might be with him.
What are you trying to do to me here?
Sorry to kill everybody's Friday evenings,
Yeah, you know what? Who knows? I mean, that's the. I think that we've talked about this really since Ange's arrival, is his departure, and his inevitable departure at some point in the future would be the next big test for the club, as far as where's the coherence in decision making and the operating model on the footballing side. I've joked about Kevin Muscat because he's had some relative success following Ange in Japan, playing the same way, and having the Man City ties, that kind of thing. That's partly tongue in cheek, but wouldn't shock me, other than who the guy is. Meaning that if he wasn't him, I would say, wow, that's an obvious kind of move. But yeah, I mean, I John Kennedy, there's
Neil Lennon was photographed in Glasgow yesterday, just saying.
Oh God.
Loves the city.
Yeah. But that's that's the doubt now, because they were so. Let's not forget that it seemed like there was a serious deliberation between Eddie Howe, Keane, and Ange Postecoglou at some point in the spring of 2021, and there is in no universe is that a coherent managerial hiring process. And I commented about that at the time when there was various reports and rumors out. So, I still, leadership has changed, but still a lot of the same people in the room. Yeah, so that'll be a big test. I obviously wish for the best, but I'm not holding my breath on whatever the transition being, something, because again, Ange is kind of a cult of personality type of person. It's a force of nature in some ways, and I just think it's unrealistic to expect that kind of situation, and I don't think that we have the infrastructure in place like Yokohama does, or sorry, is it Yokohama? No, not Yokohama. Is it Yokohama?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Japan with the Man City kind of infrastructure. Not yet. I mean, maybe that's going on behind the scenes still, and but we've talked about that as far as culture and institutional DNA and how long it takes to build that kind of thing. So yeah, it's going to be a big question mark. Let's hope it doesn't get answered this summer.
Yeah, I think everyone can just relax for the next week or so, because I don't think anything's going to happen in the next week until after the Scottish Cup. Immediate future, Alan, Aberdeen up next in the league. A game that, I mean, it's a completely meaningless game, really, but we might as well take a quick look at it. I will say this, actually, there was a commenter last week, James. I found it quite funny when I said that there are no meaningless games, and of course they pointed to preseason games that are literally meaningless, and I'm just like, yeah, but I'm talking about competitive games here. Alan, it isn't quite a meaningless game. Aberdeen have secured European football already, so in a way, this is a meaningless game for both clubs.
Well, I would disagree with you because I collect about the same amount of data for a meaningless game as a meaningful game, right? And there's all these performances to look at, right? So you learn something. I watch preseason games with great interest, not because I'm going to judge absolutely players, but you look at them from the perspective of what's the manager trying to do, what tweaks have they been applied, what players are playing in what position, etc., etc. How is their form looking, and so on and so forth. A chance to look at new players. So I do find them very meaningful. All games meaningful. So tomorrow is meaningful. Tomorrow's meaningful for Celtic. Aberdeen have now got themselves into third place. Fantastic by Barry Robson to salvage that situation. They've got, I think, guaranteed Europa League group football, which is amazing. And therefore they've achieved, their players are in the same position Celtic players were in at Hibs, of having achieved their goal for the season, and they've got really nothing left to play for. Celtic, on the other hand, have got a cup final to prepare for and starting 11 places to secure. So I'm expecting one of those games that we've seen quite a few of, as well as we see Celtic drop off often once the title is secured. We often see a trophy day annihilation of a team, and I think tomorrow could be that, simply because Aberdeen really are pretty much on their holidays now, and we're most definitely not. So I'm expecting a good performance and probably quite a few goals actually from the game. I think there's a lot to play for.
James, do you have anything to say on the game?
I agree with Alan. That would be the base case, and I think it would be notable if that's not the case. Meaning that, as we, because again, we can't know these things, but as we kind of dial in the scatter plot between the issues that we've talked about as far as maybe fatigue and concentration relative to maybe toxic combinations and all these other things, and recruitment, that if we don't play reasonably well tomorrow, given the context of the game, as Alan laid out, maybe it swings things a little bit more towards, well, on a relative basis, more to worry about on those other issues, as opposed to, not being up for games that aren't, technically really mattering that much. So yeah, I think there'll be some things to learn. And, Aberdeen are an interesting side. I mean, they've got some attacking weapons. I don't know if the Duke of Death is fit. I think it's just seen he picked something up. But, they got guys like him, Miovski, who can actually create some headaches. But they're defensively, they've been a little suspect at times. But they have a decent keeper, shot stopping. So, it's an interesting test. So yeah, I think it'll be. I think it'll be informative, because we should have absolutely nothing to worry about going into the cup final. Tomorrow might give us an idea of, well, maybe we should have a 5% anxiety going into the cup final. Still nothing to really be that worried about, but, in a theoretical world, to get ourselves worked up over nothing, maybe that'll start tomorrow.
I just checked the weather there. It's been sunny all week in Ireland, and it was sunny in Glasgow as well. And it's sunny on Sunday and Monday as well. But tomorrow is going to be cloudy, and that's disappointing for me, because Trophy Day is usually a lovely day in Glasgow. It's usually the sun's out, tops off, and everyone's enjoying themselves. But it looks like we're going to get grey and gloomy in Glasgow for Trophy Day tomorrow. But it'll be enjoyable nonetheless if Celtic do win. And I think they will. I think they'll put on a show. As Alan says, they usually do. So hopeful for that. And hopefully we still have a manager by the end of next week. I think that that's sort of my takeaway from this podcast. Apologies too if you can hear some sort of buzzing or something outside. There's machinery going on outside my house at the minute. So if that's on your podcast, I do apologize for that. So it's not something I can actually take out in the edit. So yeah, that's where we'll wrap up this week's show. Keep an eye out for our Kieran Maguire chat that will be coming out probably after the cup final. It's probably a good time to put it out. And then we also may or may not have a manager reaction if Ange does leave after the cup final. So keep an eye out for that as well. Until then, we will chat to you next week. Good luck.